Welcome back. Let's move on to question 2. Now you'll notice the question portion of this problem states that the reasoning in the argument is most vulnerable to criticism on the grounds that the argument blank. This means that this problem is a logical fallacy question. It's asking us to determine how or why the conclusion presented to us in the prompt is flawed. I found the best way to approach this type of question is to outline the propositions and conclusions made in the prompt, and then start thinking about ways of why the conclusion might be flawed before going down to the answer choices. So, if you read the question, you'll notice that it makes 3 propositions and a conclusion. The first proposition is that the average length of stay at Edgewater Hospital is 4 days. The second is that at University Hospital, the average length of stay is 6 days. And it also states that studies show that recovery rates at the 2 hospitals are similar for patients with similar illnesses. From these 3 things, it draws the conclusion that University Hospital could decrease the average length of stay for its patients without adversely affecting the quality of care for those patients. So, my first thought about how this conclusion might be flawed is the appearance of this term quality of care. The propositions, if you'll recall, all deal with comparing the length of stay for patients in the 2 hospitals and don't mention the term quality of care at all. And then, in the conclusion, all of a sudden, this term appears. This is the type of thing you should be on the lookout for in logical fallacy questions. It might mean that the conclusion is making an equivocation between 2 unlike terms by presenting them as the same or similar. How is length of stay different than quality of care? Well, think about if you were in the hospital and evaluating the quality of care. The length of stay might be a factor that influences how you would evaluate the quality of care, but surely there would be other factors as well. For me personally, I'd like to be able to trust my doctor's medical opinion, I'd like the bedside manner to be friendly, and I'd appreciate it if the hospital food made at least some gestures towards being edible. For instance, if University Hospital was some oasis where the staff waited on my every beck and call, and Edgewater Hospital was some Dickensian hell pit where the nurses yelled at me and served me gruel, then maybe I would think the quality of care at University Hospital is higher, even if I was usually staying 2 days longer than I would at Edgewater. But if we dig a little deeper into what the conclusion is actually saying, then we can see that the conclusion isn't actually making this equivocation. All it's stating is that the stay at the University Hospital could maintain its quality of care if it cuts its average length of stay. The conclusion also doesn't make a comparison between University and Edgewater Hospital. It's only making a statement about University Hospital. So it's not really dealing with equivocations because it's stating that, in fact, length of stay could be an influence on the quality of care, but that for University Hospital, it won't influence the quality of care. So I think there are a few answer choices below that will prey upon LSAT takers like me who are a little too eager to jump on the sudden appearance of quality of care and assume we're dealing with a equivocation question. The next logical flaw that I can think of is that we don't really know why patients are staying longer at University Hospital versus Edgewater Hospital. If we were to assume that everything was the exact same between the 2 hospitals, that they had the same number of employees, they treated the same illnesses, that they had the same equipment, that they had the same degree of medical proficiency amongst the doctors, then yeah, we could probably reach the conclusion that the author does, that University Hospital could decrease its average length of stay because apparently it's keeping patients hostage for 2 days longer than they need to be there. But we don't really know how similar they are. All we have is this third proposition, which states that the recovery rates at the 2 hospitals are similar for patients with similar illnesses. All we can glean from that is that A, the hospitals treat at least some of the same illnesses, and B, the recovery rate for those same illnesses are the same. So with that in mind, let's evaluate the answer choices. Starting with answer choice A, which states that the argument equates the quality of care at a hospital with the patient's average length of stay. I I think this is an answer choice that preys upon people like me who were a little too eager to call out equivocation and assume we were dealing with an equivocation question. As we discussed before, the conclusion isn't really making an equivocation between the quality of care and length of stay. It's saying that the quality of care might be influenced by the length of stay, but it won't be for University Hospital. So because answer choice A misstates how the conclusion operates or what it's actually saying, we can eliminate it. Next we have answer choice B, which in its confusing LSATI way basically states that conclusion confuses a sufficient condition with a necessary condition. If you recall when we diagram things, sufficient conditions are on the left side of the arrow because they move us to the necessary condition on the right side of the arrow. But if we look at how this argument actually operates, it's not really moving in that kind of if, then, therefore way. It's not operating in that if all A's are B's and all B's are C's, then all A's are C's kind of way. It just takes two facts about the average length of stay, observation about recovery rates, and then draws this broader conclusion. So we're not really dealing with that kind of logical frame-by-frame argument. So B doesn't really state what's at the heart of what's wrong with this argument. So we can eliminate it and move on. Next, let's look at answer choice D, which states that the argument presumes, without providing justification, that the length of time patients stay in the hospital is never relevant to the recovery rates of those patients. Now, this is making an inaccurate statement about what the conclusion is saying. The conclusion isn't saying this at all. The conclusion is stating that University Hospital, they could decrease the length of stay without influencing the quality of care, but it's not stating that the length of time is never relevant to recovery rates. That's not what it's saying. It's too broad. We know it's wrong, so we're going to eliminate it. That takes us to answer choice E, which states that the argument fails to take into account the possibility that patients at University Hospital generally prefer longer hospital stays. Okay, this might be true. Maybe people actually do prefer to stay longer in the hospital, though I haven't met any. And that if we were kicking out people who wanted to stay in the hospital, that could have an influence on quality of care. But let's take off our nervous LSAT preparing hats and approach this argument like we would in the real world. Let's say the information in this prompt we read on an online article, and then some commenter tried to call out the author by bringing up the statement made in answer choice E. Would we be persuaded by that? I don't really think so. It seems kind of far-fetched, and we can feel that it doesn't really get to the heart of what's actually wrong about the conclusion, which, as we discussed before, is we don't know how similar the two hospitals are. But because this doesn't misstate how the argument in the prompt operates or what the conclusion states in the way that our previous answer choices did, we can't eliminate it out of hand. We'll keep it on deck, but we should remember what this question is asking us. It's asking us to find the grounds on which the argument is most vulnerable to criticism. So even if this makes the argument a little vulnerable to criticism, we should see if there's a better answer that will serve as a better choice to select. That leaves us with answer choice C, which is the first one that actually reflects the flaw in the reasoning that we anticipated previously, that we don't know why patients stay at University Hospital longer than they stay at Edgewater Hospital. This answer choice states that maybe the two hospitals treat different illnesses. Well, you may be confused by the fact of there being this third proposition, which states that they deal with similar illnesses. But we don't know how much of the similar illnesses take up the amount of treatment that each hospital gives. So let's imagine that Edgewater and University hospitals are these old-timey hospitals, and they have 100 beds each. Edgewater treats mostly polio, and it dedicates 98 of its beds to polio patients. And in this magical universe, the recovery rate for polio is between 3 and 5 days, making the average stay for these patients 4 days. It uses its remaining 2 beds to treat whooping cough, and those patients recover in about 5 days. Now, University Hospital, on the other hand, uses 98 of its beds to treat scurvy patients, who stay around 5 to 7 days, making the average stay for most patients at University Hospital 6 days. Like Edgewater, University also dedicates its last 2 beds to whooping cough patients, who recover in about 5 days. Doesn't all this information fit within the propositions provided by the prompt? But doesn't it also torpedo the conclusion? If University Hospital kicked all of its scurvy patients out 2 days before they actually recovered, well, there would be a lot of people with scurvy leaving that hospital. And I think we can confidently assert that this would adversely affect the quality of care given by University Hospital. So this answer choice C really gets to the heart of why this conclusion doesn't work with the proposition. So it's a better choice than E, which we couldn't eliminate it before, but we can feel good that C is the best at criticizing the conclusion. So bigger picture, I think that this question illustrates 2 things. First, it illustrates the importance of either writing down or keeping clear in your head exactly what the question proposes. If you didn't have that in your head, you might get tripped up by some of the questions that misstate what the conclusion is saying. The second thing that this question illustrates is a common logical fallacy, which is known as confusing percentages with amounts. Even though this question doesn't explicitly mention a percentage, it uses the third proposition that recovery rates for patients with similar illnesses are similar among the 2 hospitals to get us confused. We may assume, based on the information conveyed in the prompt, that the 2 hospitals treat exactly the same illnesses, but they don't, as we found out in our whooping cough example. The amount of similar illnesses the 2 hospitals could treat might be very limited, and that they may, generally, treat very different illnesses. So we need to be on guard in logical fallacy questions for when these percentage or proportion-based statements appear, even when it's sort of hidden, like it was here. And we have to remember that percentages do not necessarily indicate amount, and proceed accordingly. So with that, I think you're ready to tackle more logical fallacy questions, keeping in mind the common logical fallacy of confusing percentages with amounts. Thank you.